Welcome to the Deeper Into the Woods podcast. I'm so excited that you're here with us today. It's a very, very special day in the Deeper Into the Woods podcast because we have the one and only, the man, the personality, the business, Wes Herman, our co-founder. Me and him, no. Our founder, CEO, Wes Herman. Also, Kelly's dad, my father-in-law, family business, you know. So we're super excited to have you here today, Wes. I think we could just start right off the bat and just start to get to know you a little bit. For those of us that are listening that don't know you, I know you, but people might not. So why not just give us a little bit of your upbringing, maybe like start at childhood. I know you've been in various different countries and things like that. Just give us a little bit of your background.
Happy to. Yep. So I was born in Canada. Mother country is to the north. And then immediately my parents took me to Colombia, South America, when I was 6 months old. And so most people think there's a natural connection between Colombia and coffee. And there probably should have been, but there's not. And it has no bearing. But came back to the United States when I was 7. Had a great time in Colombia, learned a second language, English, because Spanish was my first language, and then have really no accent to show for it, which is pretty impressive. But you know,
a huge bummer.
However you look at it. Yeah. Anyway, so that was the early years, and then grew up in Southern California after that, and that's a majority of my life was Southern California, where I grew up, met my wife. Had 4 children before relocating to the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
So that's in a nutshell, man.
That's a very
quick.
small nutshell.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've always been sort of, I think you've been duped as serial entrepreneur. You've started businesses, jumped to new things. What is the thing that has kind of kept you into seeking after entrepreneurship rather than just going and working for a company or something like that?
It's a great question. I was asked early on when I first got married by my wife, and she said, so is it going to be that you work at a job for 30 years and you retire and that's going to kind of be the routine? And I said, I don't think so. I said, I was the first in my family to say I'm the first not to go to college because that was not in my best interest or the interest of the professors. But I really had a strong desire to be done with school early and get on with my life and get busy doing something that I felt was more meaningful than sitting in a classroom. So when I graduated from high school, my friends were all going off to college, and so what I decided was I needed to have 4 goals, or goals that I could achieve in 4 years, so that when they returned from school, I'd have something to show for it. So my first goal was to be married. The second goal was, really the driving factor of being married was I'd heard something or read something that said that you're more successful if you're married. You make more money in your lifetime. So I thought, okay.
Statistically.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So aside from that, found the perfect woman, 40 years now married, that's pretty impressive. So goal number 1 was to be married. The second was to own a home. The third was to own a business. And I really didn't know what that meant. But I knew that it was something I wanted to achieve because I had seen other people who had owned businesses and they looked successful. They had the things that I thought I wanted. Yeah. And then the fourth goal was to own a Mercedes-Benz. And so if I could achieve those all by the time I was 21, then that was exactly where I needed to be. And those were the driving factors. So got married, bought a home. And then right after we were married, the business I was working in, which was a cabinet shop, came up for sale. And I told my wife, I said, hey, I probably need to buy this business. And she said, well, what's that mean to own a business? I said, I have no idea. We're 21. I mean, we don't know much about anything. And so we did. And then 6 months into that business, my bank account was fat. And I was able to buy the Mercedes, and you check off all the goals, 21, got them all done. So
6 months in,
to the business.
Yeah.
But then,
did you start off with some money, or did it?
no, to buy the business.
Yeah.
No. I had watched my father, who was really good at figuring out how to use other people's money to achieve goals, and so we had some very great help from people that we knew that said, "Hey, we believe in what you're doing, and here's some money. Go do it." And if my landlord, my first landlord, would have believed in me like those people did, it would be a home run. But he didn't think it was going to work. He didn't think I'd succeed, and was not going to lease me the building. And so had to figure out how to overcome that. And eventually he was good with it, and we started business career. So back to the idea of serial entrepreneur. That was the first business, and then I've either owned or started 7 different businesses, and had a great time doing that. I early on I thought, life is too short to just do one thing. I want to do multiple things. But really now it's come full circle. I really love what we're doing at the Woods Coffee. This has been the most meaningful part of my career, and definitely the most successful part of my career. So I'm really enjoying it. And who wouldn't enjoy working with your family? And even you. I mean, married in, it's awesome.
Even me.
Not everyone enjoys working with their family.
No.
There's some of our family that
thing
doesn't
going.
like working with our family, but
exactly.
it's okay.
But for the most part, that's a rewarding experience, and whether you realize it or not in the moment, I think that those things are generationally rich with lots of history in a family dynamic. So I'm enjoying it, and working it for all it's worth.
Yeah, it's okay.
So I want to take you back to when you were talking about your goals.
Yeah.
When you were 21, you wanted to, own a home, get married, start a business, own a Mercedes, and that was, I think, in your eyes at that point, was that what success looked like? And now, how has that changed from then when you were 21? Those are your goals. That's what maybe success looked like for you. Now we're here, Woods Coffee, family business. How is success, or the idea of what success looks like for you, has that changed?
Yeah. Well, first let me put that in context. When I set those 4 goals, I was 17 years old. So, you don't have a lot of thought, like these, like you see things and you say, oh yeah, I want that, and you kind of pick and choose. And it was really funny because none of them got achieved until I was 21. Like it all happened at once. So I put in 4 solid years of hard work to get to the point where we could achieve all those 4 goals at once almost. And so that was totally fun. Now, those were simple goals, right? They didn't necessarily mean success. They were the beginning of a lifelong drive towards success. Sorry. So today, success looks a lot different. Like in those days when I talk about achievements and doing things and making enough money to buy a Mercedes-Benz and those type of things, those are not necessarily the driving factors in business. And I've learned early on, and still to this day, that the driving factors are really success means doing things that are significant, and achieving things with others is so much more rewarding than making money or any status that comes along with that. So that's the kind of stuff that drives me to this day, and I really enjoy.
So we've had about 17 years of now kind of history from starting the business up until now. And as you think back on those years, and you think about how you envisioned Woods being back then and how it is today, is that the same picture, or has it like completely become something that you didn't expect or imagine?
Yeah. Well, the truth is that we set a goal of, I shouldn't say goal. We wrote a business plan. Yeah. And when I speak to various groups and maybe younger kids that want to learn about business, it's all about setting that business plan and deciding what you're going to do so you can achieve certain things. And in our case, that business plan has been our roadmap. And although we actually wrote things down, and we just made decisions based on what we were going to do, because it was probably a year before we opened, so 18 years ago.
Yeah.
It's all falling into place, and including multiple locations. That's a big driver in any business. And I get people asking me all the time, like, how do I get to a place where I can do multiple locations and do this type of thing? And I say, that's not necessarily what you should be aspiring to do. It has to fit in your business plan. Does it work to do multiple locations?
Yeah.
In our case, we've been blessed to have a family that was involved in it that allowed us to do what we're doing. It would be much more complicated to do without the family involvement.
Yeah.
So, but from the beginning, yes, it was always about doing multiple locations, and what we've achieved over this last 17 years is pretty much in keeping with what we had envisioned. Would you agree with that, Kelly?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, I don't know if my thought process 18 years ago, I was also only 17 years old at that point. If
people know
I
how old you are.
thought beyond maybe 10 or 12 stores, like I think the future then for me was like maybe that size of a company. So I think that now that we've gone beyond, and obviously through the years, the dream gets bigger and grows with our growth for me. But I don't think I necessarily thought, oh yeah, 18 years from now, we're going to have 350 employees and we're going to have 18 locations. We're going to be down in Bellevue, all of those things,
Right.
necessarily the details, maybe not so much. But I think the dream of multiple locations and having a sustainable business for our family was always part of the plan,
Yeah.
even 18 years ago.
The funny thing about that is, like, if you just start rolling and you talk that that's how it's going to go,
Yeah.
it just kind of happens, right? And it's not like we have to have some barriers or automatic stop points or anything like that. It's just like, hey, we talk about it, and everybody says, well, I guess that's what we're supposed to do, and we just kind of keep growing. And I think it still does. I am no different today than I was back then in terms of my drive and ambition to grow. I should be at a point where I'm probably pulling back and saying, oh, no, I don't want to take the risk. But I'm all in. I'm willing to take the risk, and I want to go all in, and I want to keep growing at the same rate or faster than we have in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think, like, especially within the woods and companies in general, because you had mentioned other business owners kind of coming to you for some wisdom because you've kind of been through it. But it seems like you talk about this point where there's like critical mass in a business where you are just grinding, and then all of a sudden now, like, you have come to a spot where the momentum starts to go for itself. And you talked about it in the context of, should we do multiple locations or not? But even if there's not multiple locations and it's not physical growth, like talking about sales growth or product growth, could you speak to that a little bit? Like, when you talk about, or when you hear the term critical mass, like how was it for Woods, and how, where did we find that sort of place where we started to build momentum?
Yeah, it's a great question and a great point, because a lot of what we did in the early years was just survival.
Yeah.
And you do things just out of a need to make sure that tomorrow we're going to still be open, and that we had enough guests to serve, that allowed us to make enough money to pay the people that were working. And so it becomes one of those things. So critical mass for me is, where do you get to the place where financially it's more secure, and that there's the right people in the right seats on the bus to move forward in the correct fashion. So a lot of what we do with critical mass had to be, like, when can we hire that next person that's going to do this, so we're not having to wear all the hats, but that we can take one hat off and somebody else is doing something else, and allows us to grow at a faster rate, because now you're bringing in people that have expertise in areas that you may have just filled a role. Right?
Yeah, and it seems like that's constant, right? Like, you're always having to put that one more person in place to take responsibility from someone else, to free that person up to work on growth in their area. And I think we're still in that place. Like, as a company, we're always sort of pivoting into, like, where's the next push? Like, what do we have to come up against next, right? And so...
Right, we're trying to predict that with our growth, because I think that we also hit these sort of tipping points. I remember that at like location number 5, we could open up to 5 stores, but at 5 stores felt like this new territory we were entering where we needed more support for those 5 stores. We couldn't just do it all on our own. I think we've hit those markers along the way. So it's almost like you're kind of always running up against until you get to that tipping point, and then you're sort of in this new growth phase again where you may be having to add support, or things just look a little different than they did before.
Yeah.
But don't lose sight of the fact, excuse me, don't lose sight of the fact that it wasn't until we hit store number 6 that I actually was working full-time for the company.
Right.
I was probably working for full-time for the company,
More than
but
full-time.
I had a other full-time job that paid me so that I could afford to grow the company, and that we didn't have to put a stranglehold on the company with having to make enough money to pay me. So I worked a full-time job and did some ridiculous things to try and make it all work and pull it all together.
Yeah.
And that gets lost, at some point. And but it's a good reminder.
Yeah, I think that's huge, because I think there's a pool of entrepreneurs out there, or want to be entrepreneurs, people who are aspiring to do that, but they might not know so they would see Woods as a success possibly, and they might think, oh yeah, from the get-go it was easy peasy, or there was Wes was making money from day one, but no, you're saying you worked a full-time job, hustled on the side to start Woods Coffee with the family, and grinded it for years and years before.
And
I
he
mean, store
even worked-
6, that's how many years in is that? That's like at least
Well, about 5 years.
5
in.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, he even worked, and my mom worked on the floor as baristas for years.
Yeah.
I mean,
I remember
we
that.
would be like, you're working the Friday night shift because we're all teenagers and we want to go hang out with our friends, and he would do it. And sometimes you'd get into some
We got some
situations.
sticky nonetheless. Yeah, no, it was fun. But those are the good things, part of our memory, part of our history. It gets lost though with currently how people view the company, because people view the company as always existing and always being at a certain size and success, whereas every single company starts very small and grows. And some don't grow, some fail. So we've been blessed to succeed. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
But even going back, like in the very beginning, I know Kelly and I, we have great memories of some of the stuff we did. And when you talk about different shifts and all the stuff that we would do, we didn't know what we were doing, and it was all about how do we grow with the people that are coming into our stores? And fortunately, that was a very small number of people, and then it grew, right? And so the amount of people that grew with us, they truly saw us grow, and they enjoyed being part of that growth process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Starting in Linden, it was fun, or the early days where we would only serve a couple of guests a day, so we could kind of get it figured out.
Well, it was probably more than a couple a day.
Okay, maybe
Couple
more
an
than a
hour,
couple.
yeah.
Couple an hour.
2 guests a
Yeah.
day.
Well, but then it grew quickly, right? People caught on to it, and it was kind of fun to be able to do that, though. I think if we would have opened our doors day one with crowds of people, we might have failed.
Yeah, you get a little bit too used to that, and you lose the work ethic almost. But you hit on a really cool point, and I think it's just probably your personality and who you are. But I believe others can learn how to do this well too. It seems like you have always just thrown yourself at something and just gone for it, sort of like just risk it all. Like let's try this. I mean, obviously you didn't you had a job at the very beginning, and you made sure that your family was taken care of. You're not reckless, but you're taking a big risk. Has that always been who you are, or is that something that you've just sort of had to develop as an entrepreneur?
I think all entrepreneurs don't have a plan B. It's all about plan A.
All or nothing.
Yeah, and so that's part of the bootstrapping. We've talking about prepping for this podcast about how we started this business partnering with somebody that brought $23,000 into this business because that's what we needed to make this thing go.
Yeah.
And that seems ridiculous at this point, but it shows you how you can take very little and turn it into something just by drive and ambition and saying there's no failing at this. We're going to succeed. and pushing through that. You know, this has not been the easiest road, right? In the beginning years, this was hard. And, you know, the week before we opened the first store, this was meant to be that I had a job, and I did have a good job. And that job that I had was supposed to pay me so that we could start this company and be successful. And a week before we opened our first store, the people that I was working for decided that it'd probably be better if I didn't work for them. And so I was fired from that job. The only job I've ever been fired from, and it was kind of weird, you know, but you know, it was what it was. And so then I had to create something that allowed me to have some income and to replace that so that we could grow this company. So that's where this idea, I actually bought another small company so that I could work in that company to allow us to grow. Another one where, you know, like when I say we bought another company, I didn't have the money to do that, but I partnered with somebody who had a little bit of money, and it didn't take much, but we turned it quickly and it started making money. And that business was successful. It allowed me to do what we were doing.
Yeah. So you're now getting into some really cool territory that I think a lot of people could learn from. Is that sort of like, you say, yeah, we found a person who would, you know, partner with us. Like that in and of itself is like a huge thing, right? How does that happen? So is it relationships? Is it just, you know, it's like asking, you know, 10, 15 people, you know, what does that look like? You're obviously selling a dream or selling a vision to someone that you hope will invest in the company. What does that look like?
Yeah, and you're selling your dream, right? It's not like it's their dream, but they see it for what it's worth, and that you maybe have a successful track record or you have a great idea. 90% of all small businesses that start with money from friends and family. And that's a key factor because usually those people believe in you the most, and it usually is sometimes blindly they're willing to trust you. And in my case, it was about, you know, I had a solid business plan that said, here's the model, here's what we're going to do, and this could work. We actually partnered with somebody who had no intention of ever drinking a cup of coffee and didn't understand that, but understood the basics of how this could work.
Yeah, and understood the numbers.
Yeah, exactly. So when it comes to you know, anybody who's listening and, you know, has a desire to start their own business, it all comes down to having a good, solid plan and then finding the right people to invest with you. And one key distinction is there's a factor that happens when you're starting a business, and that is you've got a great idea, and usually the money is the missing component in most small businesses startup. And so that money becomes ultimately important, and oftentimes as an entrepreneur, you sell your idea just to get that money. And oftentimes you give away too much of the business to make that happen. So I encourage people to negotiate that and negotiate wisely, so that you actually end up with the best possible deal for you, because the idea will live long before the money money will run out faster than the idea. The idea continues on, and then you develop a bad you know, thought process around the, you know, that what that money meant, and it's never a good place to be. We were fortunate enough that at about a year and a half in, the investor that had put up money decided that we were going too fast and we were growing too big, and he wanted to be bought out. And so we did that, and the benefit to us as a company, as a family, has been huge because of that.
Yeah, as it pertains to retaining ownership.
Yeah, retaining ownership and gaining back 100% of the business.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah, see, I feel like I'm learning stuff right now too. It's really cool. And then you talk about sort of the nitty gritty, you know, like working out the deal in the beginning. Like you talk about the deal, like what kind of deal are we getting? But you right now in the company are really the main player when it comes to seeking and finding new locations for Woods, and dealing with lease negotiations, you know, all those things that go into that. which is a world that I fully don't understand at all. And I think it's confusing to a lot of people. So without like giving away all our secrets, like what are some of the things that, man, if I'm going out there...
I have no secrets, by the way.
Perfect. If I'm going out there and I want to start a juice shop or something, like what am I looking for? Like when I go out and I meet with a landlord or something, what do I need to be looking for and what do I need to stay away from?
Yeah. Boy, that's those are a lot of interesting questions there. And by the way, let's not forget to go back to that original start and some of the things that we had to overcome, because I think that every business that starts has to overcome a lot of obstacles. And in our case, we had more than our fair share. And it's only by the grace of God that we succeeded. So. But going back to your question about what are you looking for? If I'm starting a business, I think one of the key factors that most people fail is that initial negotiation for the space that you're going to occupy. Because most people think like, oh, that's a space, it costs X, and I just need to sign. Yeah. And whereas they don't understand that all those things are negotiable, and that that's probably the place where you'll either make it or break it. And so a lot of times I will enter into situations with people who, are talking about starting a business or are going to buy a business. And we talk about those particular points because it's the foundation. Because once you have that foundation laid for how much it's going to cost you to lease the space, what's it going to take to put whatever you're putting into the space, and then, how does all that lay out? That's the foundation as to whether you're going to make it or break it. So we at this point spend an inordinate amount of time and we've developed a system internally with Colin, who has come up with a brilliant no-go form that you put in certain criteria, and then it either gives us a green light or red light, and then it becomes a negotiation. How can we manipulate some of these areas to see if we can get it into the green?
Yeah, if it's a red light, something needs to change.
How red is it?
Yeah, is it just orange?
Yeah. So it's kind of one of those fun things. I probably enjoy that as much as I do anything else, because I love real estate and I like learning about some of those aspects. So for a guy that doesn't like to get too deep into the details, because
there's a lot of detail in there.
It's fun, and trust me, I'm surrounded by people who continually are able to look at the factors that I may oversee or miss out on that can give me better direction. Yeah,
you've surrounded yourself with a really good team, and I think that's key too, is getting people on your team that are different than you and see things differently. Okay. Why don't we transition into a little bit more of what are some of the things that have been really tough to overcome, in our trajectory of business? 17 years, a lot has happened. A lot of good things have happened, and a lot of not great things have happened too. What's like one that sticks out as like, man, we had to overcome this, or we're overcoming this? Yeah. Like, what's kind of the biggest thing we've had to jump over?
I spilled a gallon of milk. No, that's not it. There's no
That's
use.
Every single day.
There's no point in crying over that. And that's one of the funnier things that happens. So is like when somebody fills their shoe with a gallon of milk.
I've done that.
Yeah, me
that's
too.
funny.
I've had it all over my clothes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh man.
I've filled my shoe with ice cream base, which is even more fun.
Yeah. So those are incidental contact things that happen. It's kind of fun. So the biggest obstacle we ever had to overcome, here we are, we start this business, and I told you about, losing my job that was supposed to be the buffer and the ability.
Right before we open.
Before we open. And then it was, how do we make this company work? And then it's, lots of various factors that come along the way. So at year one, we'd opened 2 stores because part of our business plan was that we were going to open multiple locations. And we had identified 2 locations that we really wanted, and one was already under contract with Starbucks. And so we chose the other one, which was brilliant that we were forced into that. It wasn't brilliant on our part. It just worked out, and it worked out brilliantly because it's a great site and allowed us to have a sit-down location with drive-through, which in those days was actually a newer concept. You weren't seeing that. You were either seeing drive-through or you're seeing sit-down, but the combination of those two was just starting to come around. And so that was a lot of fun and gave us an opportunity. 6 months in, we opened our second location, which was that Starbucks location that they gave up on. And so in the same town of Linden, at that point, 6,000 people. So now here we are trying to run 2 businesses and later on 3 businesses in the town of Linden with 6,000 people. And we weren't the only game in town. There were a couple other coffee shops. So, those are some of the factors that we came up against in terms of competition, learning the marketplace, learning how we can pull this off. And then eventually we prove ourselves, and then we can go to Bellingham, the big city of Bellingham, and what's that going to be like? And believe it or not, we talked about that, this is unbelievable that we're going to have a chance to go to Bellingham. And now that seems so way back. But back to your question. So at year 1, we opened 2 stores, and I went away to federal prison, and went away to federal prison for a year. And so I'm supposedly the brains of the organization.
Supposedly.
So I have to step out for a year. And I've got a young family, younger than they are now, a wife and 4 children that they're going to be left behind to run this business. And literally I said to them and our business partner at that point said, I don't know if this will be here when I get back. Just do your best. And when I return, if it's still here, then we'll be off to the races. I'll be writing the next business plan as to where our growth is going to be while I'm away. And so so that is a big, big deal. And, I told you about the business that I was in that was providing the income. And that was supposedly, we put a manager in place who was going to provide enough income so that, my wife and kids could have a little bit of income, because the coffee shops certainly weren't providing that yet. And he decided that he could do things better than how I'd asked him to do it, and ended up losing a lot of money compared to the money that he was going to make. So we really had a tough first couple of years of the business where, you're getting another roadblock thrown in your way, and you have to overcome that, and you're jumping a bigger hurdle every time. And so then when I returned from prison, and we reunited as a family, and literally within a week of being back, it was like it had never happened, and we were off to the races. And that's when we negotiated and got our 3rd location in Linden, and started that ball rolling of where we are today.
It's crazy. So now everyone thinks you're probably a murderer or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or that business was like a drug dealing business or something.
Right.
And so maybe we should just leave them in suspense for a little bit. But so now, since you brought that up, so now how did all of that happen? Now give us a little bit of a history of, what was the charges against you, and how did that all unfold?
Yeah. Well, it's pretty interesting. I did end up going to prison on 1 count of mail fraud. And
MALE?
Yes. No.
MAIL.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. I was never good at spelling. And it all stemmed from an event that happened 10 years before we opened the Woods. And at that 10-year mark, I was bitten by a mosquito, and I contracted a case of viral encephalitis. It's a deadly disease that in the same week that I contracted it, there were 7 total people in the same park that contracted it, and I'm the only one that lived out of those 7 people.
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah, it's a bad deal. You had to look at her to say.
Well, I just didn't know she knew that.
I knew.
Okay.
This
is
my
true?
daughter.
I was alive at this point. No, but I was really little, so I don't totally remember. But yeah.
That's
So
crazy.
anyway, got bit by the mosquito, and fortunately, I had an insurance policy that paid me for disability, and I was literally on my back for an entire year. And so during that time, recover, and then we go about 5 years into this, and this is still all pre-Woods, and I'm being paid for disability. And I would check in monthly. Doctor would, sign off, and then I get a check. And eventually you get down to the 5-year mark, and that's kind of a marker as to whether you're permanently disabled or whether you can return to work. And we agreed with the insurance company that I could return to work, and we signed an agreement that said, hey, this has been a good business relationship, we're done, and we move on. So 5-year period equals 60 months, right? And after I'd signed the agreement, they came back and said, oh, by the way, we made a mistake and we'd given you 61 payments. And so could you please mail that one check back to us? And that's the beginning of the breakdown of this whole thing, because I was being entrapped at that point. The insurance company knew what they were doing, and by asking for that check back, it crossed state lines. And then at a later date, they went back to the FBI and said, we now think that this guy did us wrong, and we want you to investigate, and we have this check that crossed state lines, which allows us to open this up as a mail fraud situation. So it's kind of a convoluted way, but it's a commonplace within some of these insurance companies. And so the FBI started investigating, and then about another 4.5 years go by. So now we're 9.5 years past the incident, and they indicted me on that one count of mail fraud, knowing that they win every single one of their cases. Well, that's not true. They win 96% of cases, and that they would come to me with an offer in compromise. So what they were coming after me for was 5 years in prison and $750,000. And so the attorneys at that point said, it's in your best interest just to sign whatever agreement they come back to you with, an offer in compromise, and just take whatever they offer. So when they slide that piece of paper across the table, rather than take 5 years that they go to trial and risk 5 years, where they win 96% of the time, just sign that agreement. So they came with a piece of paper, and it was for 1 year in prison. And so I signed up for that. And yeah, take one of those, please.
Yeah, I'll take one.
And it seems funny now, and it's we're lighthearted about it as a family. Yeah. We have fun with it, as much fun as you can have. But it was the beginning of even a more involved part of the story, because we kind of set an agenda for this is how long I'll be there. I'll get out. We can continue with the business, and everybody was kind of pointing towards that date. And during the time in prison, they came to me and said, by the way, you'll be taken when you're out of prison to INS prison, and you'll be prepared for deportation back to your home country of Canada with a lifetime ban of ever entering the United States. And so that's all in motion, and that was kind of shocking to us all because we didn't sign that in agreement. Yeah. It's just a byproduct. And so the idea that that was going to happen was really devastating to the family. It was very hard, and we spent a lot of the time in prison trying to fight that and find legal ways around it. And as it came down to it, as I was getting out of prison, we were just less than 2 months away from both of our daughters getting married. Yeah. And we're not sure if they're going to get married in Canada, the U.S., where's Wes going to be, kind of thing. And this kind of changes the dynamics of the business and our business plan and all that. And so I get one meeting before a judge that just makes a decision as to whether you're actually going to be deported or not. And again, the odds are stacked against me. Almost everybody gets deported. And he saw favor or wanted to bestow favor on me and chose to allow me to stay here, and not only stay here, but apply for citizenship, which I have now, and I'm a proud member of the United States. So it's been that was a really interesting time. Yeah. I returned from prison, and immediately both my daughters get married, and they're kind of the heart and soul of the company at that point, because they're the face of the company in the stores, along with others. I mean, obviously we can't do it with just two people, but there's lots of people involved, and we're doing our thing. But they get married. You join the family, which is awesome. Yeah. And I hardly knew you at that point.
Yeah, I think we met in prison.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, I was in prison. You were in prison.
Well, I've said that to a few people. I mean,
we met in the visiting room, or whatever you call it.
So the idea of overcoming obstacles, right?
Totally.
That's the lesson through all this in entrepreneurship, that you're going to be faced with certain challenges. And people like the romantic part of starting a business and what that looks like. But when it starts getting tough, and you're having to put in 80 hours a week, and you don't have a social life, and you have to do all the things you have to do, it changes. And not everybody's made to do that. And so they have to be prepared and know how hard that's going to be. And in our case, it was harder than most.
Yeah, I'd say so. I remember that time, vividly. That was almost, how long ago was that now? 12 years? No, it's 15.
15
years, yeah.
So it's as long as we've been married, so it's
Yeah.
15 years.
Yeah.
16 years, almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was probably the hardest thing the family has ever had to go through. Especially, your wife, Diane, she kind of got handed a lot, right?
Right.
2 teenage boys at that time, 2 responsible girls, but 2 reckless teenage boys.
I don't know about reckless.
They're pretty crazy. We'll give them that. But just a lot of trials for a family to go through. Right at the beginning, here's business that is nowhere near, smooth sailing, and you go away to prison for a year, and we're visiting, every weekend or something, but life goes on, and it, you somehow just do it, and you pick yourself up and you just do it, and then pretty soon it's over.
And it's back to that plan A, right?
Yeah.
There is no plan B. What do we do? Fold our tent and go home?
Yeah.
It's like this is where you persevere and make it happen.
Yeah. So in that time where you get the insurance company kind of coming after you, so they're basically thinking or suspecting you of fraud, insurance fraud.
Mail fraud.
Well, insurance fraud, but they couldn't prove it, right?
Right.
They couldn't necessarily go after you for that, but mail fraud, they know they could win that case, and so, yeah, that's weird. I haven't heard all those details, so it's just coming in kind of fresh, as everyone else is. But that's interesting, and it's crazy, all in the same. So, what's your mindset during all of that? Because what do you do? You're you didn't purposefully, you didn't steal money, you didn't do any of that. You were just trying to do things the right way, and all of a sudden, you're getting attacked by an insurance company, essentially. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. Well, it's many people have said, aren't you bitter, or, isn't that hard for you to forgive, or, how do you move on from that? And honestly, it was an adventure. I viewed everything in my life as an adventure, and it was just one more adventure, probably not the nicest, cushiest adventure I've ever been on. Yeah. But, it's one of those things where you have to make a decision, what is it that's important to you? And that was a time of my life where I just, knew if we could just get through this, we can move forward. And so you kind of set your sights on things out in front and things above, and you look forward to better days. And we did that, and knowing that it was just a time, a juncture, and if we can get through this, then we can move forward.
Yeah.
I think that you are a really great example of having a positive mindset, and I think that you've shown us how far that can go. If you, like you just explained, have a positive outlook on what's going on in your life that could seem like something that could just crush you, and that some people might never be the same for the worse, not for the better. But you chose to say, it's an adventure, this is my life, this is what's happening. I'm going to choose a positive mindset. I'm going to choose to look ahead to the future, which then I think is a result of your success happens through that mindset. Yeah. And I think there's a lot to learn there, and you're a real example of it. So I think sometimes we hear those things, just have a positive mindset, just think positively, and it's going to be great. But you're living proof of that's true, and that you didn't let it stop you. It didn't let it crush you. You know, we could have easily been in a far worse situation, I think, if you wouldn't have had that positive mindset, even for us, the other members of your family, to say, hey, it's okay, we're just gonna push through this, we're gonna figure it out, we're gonna keep going, our dream is still the same, our plan is still the same, we're not gonna let this derail us. And that's what I think, that's why we're still successful today, I think, is that mindset.
Yeah. Well, and for anybody who's listening and hears this story, it oftentimes becomes a matter of perspective, right? We think we're having a bad day, or that something isn't going quite right, and then we hear a story of someone who has had to deal with something and overcome a challenge. I think it puts some of these minor things in perspective and makes us realize, okay, I can do this because obviously people have overcome greater challenges. And in those days, I mean, I can't emphasize enough how on the edge we always were financially to make this happen. It wasn't like we just had money and we start new stores and like this is easy. We had to be very diligent about how to do that, how to juggle and make that all work, which is really I think what most entrepreneurs do, and they figure out a way to make it work. And eventually it catches up, and in our case it caught up at about store number 6, where then I got to quit working, a job, and focus all my energy on woods, which has been, the greatest time of my life. And coming back from prison, it's been nothing but fun and games. And for me, it's a matter of perspective, right? Yeah. There could be a lot worse places to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think holding on to what you've been through as a reference point for what you're doing today is kind of what you're saying, right? That's right. The key. When we're going through something today, like, is it as bad as what we went through 10 years ago, 15 years ago? Right. Yeah. Because we're still going through adversity today. Sure. Like always, there's always something in front of us. There's always a challenge, whether it's small or big, and that's totally subjective. But whatever it is, like, we have to stick with it, and we have to keep going, and we have to have our sights set on something much bigger than today.
Absolutely.
So that's great. I think that mindset has really established a culture here in the company, and it's challenged people to get out there and create something, and to stir the pot and to figure out a way to solve a problem in a different way that no one's thought of. And I think that just all comes from trials and just blasting through adversity, and you just keep going. So it's really good, man. So just sort of, so now taking our story from 15 years ago, when you come back from prison, and we sort of, like you say, we just kind of picked back up where we left off. Things were still in motion when you were gone. So how did that change, like, the vision for the future at all, though? Like, when we're talking about, like, perspective and, like, challenging things and sort of walking right through adversity, like, did it change your mindset? Like, did it change the vision of the company at all? Where did it take us?
Yeah, I don't think it changed our plan, but it energized me in a new way. And here's what we can achieve, moving forward. Yeah. And there is something freeing about being out of prison. And,
I bet.
If I can use that. And it really gives you energy to think, okay, now I'm free. I can do what I want, because you spend a year doing something what other people want you to do.
On their schedule.
Yep. Yeah. And and we could do an entire other podcast on what life in prison is like.
I feel like we're going to have to do that. I was just going to say the same thing.
That's not really woods related. That'd be a different podcast.
Oh, we got to go there, though. It's really, you got great stories. I've heard some of them.
So the trajectory of where we go from there is enhanced, because now we have more energy. At least I do. And for me, in those early years, I think that somebody who is the leader and the visionary, people just follow because they assume somebody knows what they're doing, and so I paint the picture oftentimes like it's a done deal and like we know what we're doing and we're just moving forward, and then everybody kind of comes around and we just keep going.
Yeah.
So that's what's happened over the last 15 years since that moment in time, and we get back and literally open another store within as fast as we possibly can when I get back. And I want the momentum to continue. And then we go on from there. It took us a while to get that fourth store. And then when we got into 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, those all came kind of at the same time and coalesced around in 08 when the economy was down.
Right.
And we built six stores in an 18-month period. And that was exciting because that was like, okay, hey, we're in a stride, and we never thought about like, oh, could we lose this because the economy's going down, and it's a bad time. We were super excited and energized, and everything seemed to be working right. So that gave us a springboard to say, okay, we proved this, and we proved ourselves, and then it was just like, then it just kept compounding after that. To this day, right? And so the energy now is around where do we go next? How do we take this from 18 locations to 36 locations, and how do we take it to 50 and on and on? So I'm more excited now than I ever have been. I think that there's a ton of opportunity, and having now been in the Bellevue, King County, Bothell communities now, where we built 4 stores in the last couple of years. That's really shown that we can do distance and we can do bigger markets and do them effectively. Yeah. And so we've got a lot of energy there, and it's going to carry us as we continue to grow.
Yeah. And one thing I think about when you say that is when we talk about growth and more stores, I think some of the challenge that I've heard or I've had to speak to is like, are you guys just trying to like take over the world? You're trying to be the next Starbucks? Like, what's the thing here? Why do we have to keep growing? Yeah. And it's just like kind of a weird thing because you don't really think about it. We don't think about it that much because we love what we do, and we see what a Woods store does to a community. Yeah. Like when a Woods location gets planted, this little tree, into a community, it's like this, it becomes this hub of people and friendship and community, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of activity around there, and people kind of assume that space as their office or their meeting space, and it's just a really cool thing. And I think that's the thing that I think of when we talk about growth is the potential of like growing communities in a really cool, tangible way. And
that also goes into, when you talk about building communities, I think it also goes into building employment.
Employment's big.
This is, we forget the fact that, it was just a few years ago where, unemployment was high, and, people were wondering, like, what kind of economy are we in? Yeah. What is happening? And now we're in robust economy where the unemployment rate is low. And it gives us opportunity to create jobs, create energy into a community. Like when we go into a Bothell community, being the last store we've just opened, it's really rewarding to see that, number one, we gave some great jobs to some great people who have bought into what we're doing, and collectively we influence a community. And now you're seeing that community rally around and be a part of that store. And that's meaningful to us, and to plant those places in these different areas throughout the Pacific Northwest has been awesome.
Yeah, just like that relationship component that happens, once you go into a location, like all the relationships that come out of just one store is incredible. Mm-hmm. And I know that you're a big part of that. Like you get to kind of shake hands and be a part of the community in most of them. And so it's just such a cool thing that often sort of kind of just happens, but it's cool to reflect on it and actually be really clear about, like, it's not just growth for growth. Like we're not just trying to turn out coffee. Like it's really like this community thing that we're trying to bring to different environments. And so,
Well, and part of it is too that if you're not growing, you're dying, right? And so a lot of what we do is the growth is not just for the sake of growing, but we're building an organization. There are people that really rely on us to continue to grow, to fill different jobs and different roles in our company. People that come to us as baristas and grow through the company, people that have worked for us for 10 years in the stores, and how they can move into a different role and how they can advance. That's the kind of generational thing that I would like to see as we continue to grow this.
Man, that's so good. Man, well, thank you so much for sharing. It's like as far into your life as we could possibly get in like an hour. But I think we will have to come back for episode number 2 and get a little bit into the life of a chain gang prison guy or whatever. Because there's some fun stories in there that I think people will love, that I've heard. But we usually try and end our podcast with a story of something great that is happening within the company, something great that a guest has reached out to us with. They just wanted to share the story. So these are the stories we're sharing. I know you have one. You always have so many stories. I feel like I could just go like that and you'll have a story.
One of the greatest stories was at our Mount Vernon location when a woman emailed me and said, I met my now husband in your store. It was a blind date, and we had set this up so that we could go to a coffee shop, and I wanted an avenue of escape, and I actually had a friend of mine that was supposed to call me at a certain point, and I was going to take the call and leave. And but I stayed, and she said, and I stayed 8 hours. Wow. And I got to know this man in this booth. And so I am, when she called, said, I'm calling to ask if we can buy that booth because we want our home to be started with this experience. Yeah. And that's the kind of stuff.
The booth that they sat at for 8 hours.
The same booth. Yeah.
That is amazing.
And they only wanted that one booth, we don't want anything else, and don't custom make one. We want that one. Yeah. And so those are the kind of things that happen in our stores that are meaningful, they're life-changing, and the love story aspect of a coffee shop is pretty enormous. Yeah. And
lots of dates happening.
Yeah, absolutely. First dates, proposals, all that kind of stuff. We've actually had weddings in our stores. Yeah. We've had people that have come from their weddings in, full suit and wedding dress to take a picture in our stores because that's where they met. Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff that is rewarding because it's one of those things that people will carry the rest of their lives.
We just had a proposal yesterday too that I saw on social media. It's so cool, man. Like people just, think about it though, like it's their store. Like, sure. Like we build these stores and it's like, it's theirs.
Absolutely.
Like, come on in, like it is their store.
But that's what we want, right?
That's exactly why they're there. Yeah, that's incredible. Here's the booth in their house that they now get to eat at or whatever.
Exactly.
So cool. Man, well, thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you, Wes, for being on the podcast. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you review and pass this podcast on to whoever you think it would be beneficial to. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next week.